Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a talk not just for people around network automation. This is also for all of the rest of you here in this room. I'm Pete Crocker. I've been doing networking since Cisco was this cool startup many years ago. I've been focusing on network automation for about the last 10 years or so, and I've gone back and forth from being the person doing the day job and working for software vendors where I really wanted these tools. Today I'm at OpsMill. OpsMill is the steward of two open source projects, InfraHub and more recently here Nornir. And I'm here not representing OpsMill at all. This is a general network automation talk that has been brought about by the Network Automation Forum. So I'm going to be talking about the Network Automation Forum framework and give you a bit of a guide to what that is and point you at some resources because I think this is something here really useful for people to be able to communicate about automation. There are a lot of people that are on various parts of their organizational journey in regards to how much is automated, whether or not it's old ancient spreadsheets or they're doing really advanced automation, and regardless of where you are on that spectrum, this topic is really for you. We see that, as I said, everyone's really on this journey. However, we're still seeing that network automation here specifically is really many years behind what infrastructure and cloud automation is. And for many organizations, they're still at early stages, they're still building this out, much less trying to get to more mature maintenance of how they do automation or life cycling or evolution of services on top of that. Very, very few organizations are that far along. And what we keep on seeing is, first, everyone starts from scratch. They rebuild the same problems they solve. They come up with a new open source repo to solve the exact same thing again and again. That constantly still happens. There's very little learning out there for people to be able to figure out really what does good look like around this so that they don't make the same stupid mistakes that everyone else has done here for the last 10 years. And so from that, the Network Automation Forum was founded a number of years ago. So it is both a community and they run conferences twice a year. So the last one was in Munich a few weeks ago. There's going to be one in Tucson, Arizona in about 6 months from now. And so it's a network automation focused conference that's over 5 days. But also, the community has been getting together to try and figure out how do we evolve network automation so that not everybody's still floundering like they have been for years. And so a team of people in the network automation community got together to try and start talking about those problems I described before. And before they could start talking about how are we going to come up with architectures and tools and solutions, the first problem they ran into basically was nobody was speaking the same language. They couldn't even have a conversation about network automation because vendors viewed the world in the lens of their specific products and tools, and customers using open source packages had a very different view of the world. And so what they realized is step one on this is we need to make sure that we start talking the same language. So what we're talking about is not talking about tools, we're talking about the functional building blocks in a network automation stack. And once we got to that common language, then we could start actually having conversations. And so what I'm going to do now is introduce you to the network automation framework because for those of you that are network engineers or network architects or people in product teams or surrounding business functions, it's important for you to be able to speak, because oftentimes you are the recipient, you're the user of these automations, and you need to be able to speak with your colleagues around network automation. So this is not only for those experts around this, but this is for everyone else as well to understand what are these building blocks. The working group came out of a team of people here that is everything from vendors, so like Nokia's up there, open source packages and maintainers, people who are end deployers of this, both in enterprise and service provider space, but really a team of a broad representation of the automation community. And essentially, they came up with the first version of this framework, right? So this is, the idea here is this is not a declarative architecture trying to tell you how to do automation. This is a lexicon, a shared vocabulary around what does it take to build up an automation stack. So we'll talk a little bit through this, but the functional building blocks here, right, are over on the right-hand side, you have intent. How should my network be deployed? And where do I store all of that technical and business information about devices and IP addresses and VLANs and VRFs and all the way up possibly through to services and customer information, right? How should the network be working? That's usually used to generate configurations that would end up being deployed out to various infrastructure devices, and that's what the executor functional block is. How do I deploy those changes, right? And that can be a wide variety of tools and approaches that can take that approach. And then you've got the infrastructure down below, so your routers, switches, firewalls, load balancers, servers, VMs, whatever it is. Over on the bottom left then, you have various systems to collect that state information from those devices, right? And there's many different approaches again to that, right? This isn't trying to be prescriptive to any specific tools. This is talking about what are those functions that we need to fulfill to do automation. And then, as David just talked about here about a half hour ago, you have observability, right? How do you end up then both processing and understanding all of that state and metric information from your network? In the middle, you have orchestration. So how do I make all these components actually speak to each other, pass information back and forth? That's a pretty broad topic. And then finally, separating on top of that is presentation, right? For us humans, or command line, or increasingly LLMs, going and getting this information, how do you present that information to people who need to consume it through APIs or web interfaces or whatever it is? Now, again, this isn't a list of tools. This is talking about what are the functional building blocks that we've seen in a automation stack. Now, it is not authoritative. This really just came out a few months ago as kind of a first draft here around on this. And so we're inviting people to help with this that I'll talk about at the end. But this is a living document where we're trying to end up taking everyone here on a journey so we can actually have a decent conversation. And again, this isn't just for network automation experts. This is for you network engineers, network architects here to end up actually being able to understand when you're talking to the developer who's writing the automation code. Are you talking about collection or execution? What's the problem ultimately that you're solving? Now, part of the reason this is useful is even if you're not an expert around on this, it is great to have a blueprint so that you understand these basic building blocks. And the way I think about this is, take something like a car. I don't know how to build a car, but if something breaks on my car, if someone can explain to me the common components, then that allows me, when I go into my mechanic, at least to have a common conversation, right? Is it the tires? Is it the suspension? Is it the engine, right? Because I have that understanding of the basic building blocks of a car, that helps me to have a conversation with someone when it breaks. So I'm not trying to be an expert, but at least now I can have a common language to speak to them around. First thing that comes out of this conversation is, but where are my tools, my beloved tools? I absolutely love X. So let's go ahead and talk about tools here for a minute. The idea here is that each of the different tools and vendor products that you use, they're all going to map here to this framework. So I'll take an example, right? GNMIC, right? Popular for doing all of the telemetry collection that David was just talking about here before. That's clearly a focused tool that ends up solving that collector functional block. You take something like Prometheus, and then it's more in that observability bucket. But if you take various other tools and products out there, so something like SuzyQ, right, which is a observability tool, or you take something like Kentik, which does flow monitoring, now they fill multiple functional blocks. Not only are they going to collect information, but they're going to end up then processing that information so that it ends up actually becoming actionable. And then they are also doing that presentation layer, giving you a web interface or command line or API. And so the idea here is that for each of those different tools and products, you should be able to map which of those functional building blocks they will actually accomplish. Now, if you're newer to your automation journey here, right, this is not trying to be a roadmap about how do you do automation. Each of these different functional building blocks apply to different customers, organizations, and you don't need all of them. It may be better to start on the observability side before you get towards doing any kind of configuration deployment, for example. So there's no, this isn't a roadmap or a blueprint about how to deploy automation. This is just starting from a common language. So let's go ahead and very quickly walk through here an example of this in practice. Let's imagine that you want to roll out 50 branch sites, and you basically need to configure the same prefix on all of those. Right? You're lucky enough to have essentially tried to template how you do all of your branch site deployments, and you can even get away with using the same subnet on that. So if you want to do that, right, you've got 50 different sites, you've got one router per site, and you've got various different vendors that you need to deploy to because you've got a mixed environment. And you need to end up validating that your change got pushed properly. So to accomplish that, in this case, what we have at the bottom there is 8 different tools to accomplish this from end to end. And so by breaking it down here, first one, for example, is you have all of your intended state stored in some type of intent management platform or source of truth. So in this case, InfraHub. And so that is acting both as the intent functional building block, but of course, it's got a web interface, it's got an API on top of it as well. So it fills 2 of those functional blocks. And then you've got Ansible AAP, right? So again, that gives you not only the ability to go and deploy configurations out or orchestrate how those configurations get deployed, but it's got a web interface, for example. But then underneath it, you've got Ansible that it's actually using to go and speak to the devices, SSH to them, speak to an API, and deploy those configurations. And then once the configs have been deployed, then you need to validate that everything has been deployed properly. So you can use GNMIC, for example, to do the collection of telemetry information from a device. You've got Prometheus, who's going to end up then processing that information for metrics and for alerting. You've got Grafana then to act as that presentation layer on top to actually give you views of the dashboards and reports. And then you could also be using certain observability tools to end up actually making sure that that prefix, for example, is propagated out there and that traffic is flowing. So SusieQ could end up actually looking at the BGP tables of the devices to validate that the prefix is propagated. And Kentic can tell you about NetFlow information, that you're actually seeing packets flow to that. With that, that's a very brief introduction to the network automation framework. What I'll do is just point you at a few resources here. There is a lot more to this. In the short amount of time here today, I wanted to just make everyone aware of this, but the mapping of each of those functional building blocks into requirements and tool mapping and what is the landscape out there around network automation, this is where some of these resources will be quite useful for you. Probably one of the best ones is there's a book listing up there. This is being built. You can think of this as an open source project on building a book. So Christian Adele, actually one of David's colleagues, is a longtime expert in the network automation space and has been trying to essentially take all of this knowledge and best practices around on network automation and bring it together and share it out there with the community. So free book out there with a lot more detail going into each of those different functional building blocks, the approaches, and the why behind all of those. And if you want to get more specifically involved around the network automation community, there is NAF. As I said, they run conferences twice a year. You can join their Slack group. And then specifically here on the framework, there is a Slack channel where you can get involved around this and get repos. The presentations here for all of the NetUK speakers are all on the portal, so you should be able to get access to those instantly right now. And so summarizing this, right, this isn't trying to be an authoritative standard or architecture, right? What we're starting with here is how do we even have all of the interested parties have a common language to speak around automation? You don't need to adopt all of that to be successful on your automation journey. You can start with read-only use cases, monitoring, observability if you want. Maybe doing repeatable config deployments is a better fit for you. But the idea is at least to help people understand what does the bigger picture look like here, right? This is systems level thinking, not just thinking about how do I push a CLI change to a device, which is where I think a lot of people get stuck on, is just this narrow view of how do I use a tool to make a day one deployment, for example. Each of the different tools and vendor products probably fill multiple different roles. And so it's good to understand when you're talking about a vendor-specific tool, what roles is it filling? For instance, is it just focused on the deployment and intent side of it? Or is it more of a monitoring, observability, or full circle type solution that you're getting from them? Don't reinvent the wheel. There are so many projects, there are so many people that had started off down this path of trying to figure out how to do config deployment, figure out how to gather SNMP information, yet again, from various vendors' devices. And each one of those is usually a pet project that doesn't go anywhere, and then the entire community doesn't end up then building upon some very strong foundations so that we can all take advantage of it, so we can have broader vendor and technology support, so that we can have a bigger group of people keeping these various projects maintained. So find out about what are all the available solutions and open source projects that are out there today. Some of the resources I pointed at you will give you a landscape of all the tooling around there. And so find one of those to go contribute to, as opposed to starting yet again a new open source project in your spare time that Claude wrote. And with that, last few links here for the NAF Slack channel and GitHub. You can pull up the presentation if you want to click on those links. And I'm finished. Thanks for your time, and let me know if you have any questions.
Questions for Pete?
Or get me over lunch.